boys. We got, this title of this panel is Road to Revenue, and we've got Parker and John here of Zapright. So, John, I'll start off with you, man. You've been building Zapright for a minute, and it's been all in a bear market. So it's obviously a very interesting time, right? I mean, from 2010 to 2020, a lot of tech companies were, getting a bunch of funding and just essentially not making any money. And that was kind of the model for a decent amount of time. So you worked in a time where it was a little bit different, a little bit harder to get, some venture capital funding. Money was a little tighter. So talk us a little bit about that and that experience kind of, I guess, building the past couple years.
Okay, there we go. That should be it. Well, not technically true. Zapright had started before the 2022 bear market kicked in. So the product had been live, and when I came down to Austin first, I left Canada where I'd been living at the time, and I came down to Austin in September 2021. And that was really just a time when there was a hive of activity going on with Bitcoin and Bitcoin development, particularly here in Austin. There was a lot of VC money still out there. There was a lot of people excited about what was happening. There was a lot of building happening at the time. And we did manage to raise a small bit of money in a small pre-seed round. But then very quickly the bear market kicked in. So we had to be very cautious about how we were actually going to spend that money and what it was going to be used on. And so there was a lot of decisions that had to be made on how we could, make that runway last as long as possible. But it was a challenge, but it's an exciting challenge. And I mean, part of that, I guess we can, touch on later, but like part of that was just putting some of that in Bitcoin treasury, which, if you're conservative with your burn, you can ride out the bear market and come out the other side. And then as the price comes up, you start to extend your runway again. So it's a lot of work. There's a lot of decisions to be made, but yeah, bear market's definitely a different beast than a bull market for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And we're definitely coming into, seemingly another bull market here. So I guess how do you differentiate between like, all right, Bitcoin treasury with the burn, let's get into that. Like, how are you guys looking at, I guess, holding Bitcoin on the balance sheet? Because obviously, we're all Bitcoiners here, but it's a very volatile asset, right? So, 1 month it could be up 10, 20% or whatever we've seen it run, and the next month it could be down. So how are you, I guess, as business owners and, kind of running a startup with that burn, how are you going to, I guess, prepare yourself going forward with this bull market we got coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing I'd say is that you have to be cognizant of where you're at in the cycle. And when you're running a business, and particularly if you've raised money, you're in the business of allocating capital, and part of that is how you manage your own balance sheet. And so I do think that the majority of our company's capital today is in Bitcoin, but that if it was in 2021, I think we'd evaluate the relative distribution differently, not to be traders, but life stage of the company, what we're doing to our burn on a monthly basis to reduce it, and also knowing where we're at. I'd personally feel uncomfortable if we did not have a majority of our balance sheet in Bitcoin today, but that necessarily wouldn't be the case depending on where our runway is relative to our aggregate balance sheet, such that at the end of the next bull run, we might not be worried about a drawdown because we've had reduced our burn to such a level that it's nominal. But if you're just getting out, you got to be very cognizant of it, because you have to get to the point where you're actually cutting out of that burn every month from your actual operations. But you are a manager of a balance sheet if you're raising money and you're in the business of Bitcoin. And so I also think not having any Bitcoin on your balance sheet if you're building for Bitcoin is something that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And then, the title of this panel is Road to Revenue. So I kind of want to dive into that on how you guys are looking at, growing this revenue during this bull market, whether it's, you know, the marketing aspect, new people coming into Bitcoin, how you're going to kind of level that. And then, you know, from the burn, right, you know, revenue is one thing, but how do you guys determine, you know, when to quit, I guess, dumping money back into the company to become, you know, seemingly profitable, because it's, I guess, like a difficult kind of area here in startups where, you know, a lot of them don't necessarily become profitable for years at a time, early on at least. So, you know, how are you guys going to, I guess, view the revenue growth seemingly here with this bull market, and then, determine how much to kind of keep putting in there?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's kind of overlap on the last question, because you have to have, I mean, you have to have a portion of your treasury in Bitcoin. And what we're trying to do is, as a business, we're trying to build tools that make it easier for businesses to accept Bitcoin payments and to get Bitcoin onto their balance sheet and into their treasury. And so we have to practice what we preach as well. And we have to recognize that that is how we are running our business. And so we have to build the tools that we want and that we want to offer then to users. And so, you know, a large part of that is recognizing that over the longer term, Bitcoin on your balance sheet is the best option. But again, obviously, there's like, you do have to weigh up like those decisions all the way along the way. And then, of course, like, you know, we can get into like subscription models that we just announced and stuff like that, where we actually start to look at revenue coming in. But as you touched on, an early part of that is like, you are not going to be making money in the early days of your business, and that's where VC money comes in. And it's all about just managing that balance sheet and that treasury, and Bitcoin plays a huge part in that.
Yeah, and one thing I'd add, I have kind of an experience from having worked at Unchained, and I really viewed it as a different problem because we were offering a custody solution, and it's very difficult to get people to upgrade how they're custodying their Bitcoin, and before they ever know whether or not the solution is secure, it often requires foot soldiers to be the first ones through the door on a new custody solution, and no one wants to be the first one through the door. And so when we were building Unchained, I really viewed those first people coming in as creating equity value, because they were not the test dummies. I was the test dummy. I was, you know, one of the first vaults that existed before vaults was even live. But that was a different problem as to how I see Zaprite. And when Will and I were talking with John last spring and into summer when we were joining Zaprite, was that this is the type of business, and not every business is the same, not every model is the same, but we need to get to profitability as quickly as possible, and we need to be charging for it before we're ever out publicly pitching it. And oftentimes, I think, you know, I've experienced this in my prior role, but I think a lot of people who are working on early Bitcoin startups and tinkering with ideas that they don't, you know, they believe in it, they have a vision that it will work, but they don't know that it's actually in many ways easier to tell a story and to raise money about the promise of a future market than it is to actually generate cash. And generating cash, and Nifty's in the back, and she's been preaching this, that cash flow is king. That really, on a, you know, not just on a Bitcoin standard, but more generally, the security of your company, the security of the project you're working on is figuring out how to generate positive net cash flow every month, that you don't have to be dependent on outside capital. But one of the scary things is for an early company is actually putting a price tag on it and putting it in market and seeing like, well, okay, people say they like this, but are they willing to pay for it? And if they're not willing to pay for it, then you don't have a product. And so the way that we're approaching Zaprite is there's a price, and even though it is daunting to say, hey, we do feel a little early in Bitcoin payments, but we also feel like the right time is now, and we're maximally incentivized to know whether the market, and specifically the market of our customers, agrees with it. And so we then really look at the trajectory of how many paying customers are we bringing on each month? Is it accelerating? Because those two things, regardless, or not necessarily regardless, like the actual absolute level of burn is relevant, but that's reinforcing the market signal. Are you onboarding in an accelerating way, paying customers, and are you seeing trends in that allow you to believe in a credible way that it will continue to get you to a point of profitability? And if you don't, then you need to quickly reassess whether what you're building is the right thing. Because people have the instinct before they even start a company that it's the right thing, but the actual follow through of paying customers is what dictates whether your vision combined with your ability to execute matches to where the market is.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit onto that as well, if your business model is to charge your users at the end of the day, the quicker you can do that to get product validation, the better. As a first-time founder and solo founder, I fell into that trap for a long time of just wanting to offer this product for free. And I thought I'll eventually put the pricing levels on it, but I just want to add this extra feature. I just want to add this extra feature. I just want to add one more. And eventually, obviously, we got the pricing models in there. But then after realizing that, I thought like, oh, I wish I'd done it a hell of a lot earlier, because not only does it validate if you actually have a good product that your customers are willing to pay for, but they're going to bring you so much feedback as well, because they're now invested in your product and they're paying for your product, and they're going to give you feedback because they want to pay for your product. They've chosen to do that. And so they're the ones that will give you the best feedback. The free users are, they're amazing, they're great, but as a founder, you kind of fall into that trap of wanting to build everything for them. But the sooner you can validate that pricing model up front, the better.
Yeah, and also just to that point, feedback from a paying customer is far greater than feedback from someone that isn't. It's like, hey, could you add X or Y? It's like, well, are you? If the question isn't, well, are you willing to pay for it? Then it really introduces cost to your business and distraction rather than focus and cold, hard economic facts and realities of whether you're building the right thing.
Yeah, these are all great points. And it seems like in the Bitcoin space, right, everything's, free and open source. That's kind of like the mantra, right? But at the end of the day, right, companies need to make money and kind of, develop that. So John, I want to talk about a little bit that mental hurdle to get over, building ZapRide initially for free, trying to operate all those things, and now kind of shifting into more of a subscription model. I guess, how did you get over that mental hurdle initially? And, I guess, how have you seen things kind of develop since you guys have kind of moved to that model?
Well, for me personally, like I said, this is the first kind of real startup that I've built. So I didn't know a lot of the things that I needed to do. And so for me, having Parker and Will join the team was a huge lift, because that brought in experience that I didn't have. And so now we could actually start to have all of these conversations that needed to happen for ZapRide. It was at the time where, I built an MVP. It was good. It was functioning, but I built the code myself, and it was spaghetti code, and it had to be completely rewritten by a proper developer eventually. But these were all kind of things that were kind of naturally happening once a little bit of money came in. But then, like I said, it took expanding the team, bringing Parker and Will on to actually have those real conversations, get these guys expert knowledge like they've done it before. And then that was really, the kind of push that I needed to realize that, okay, this stuff is important, right? It needs to happen, and it needs to happen quicker rather than later.
Yeah, I'll just add, because you made a comment that made me think of, Bitcoiners are a funny lot. If you offer a product for free, they're going to say, if the product's free, you're the product. And then if you charge, there's going to be some of them that bitch because it's not free. And so the far better solution is to create maximal alignment between your customers. And that is, if they value what you're doing and respect you, why would they expect you to get up and work for free? And that's not a good use of your time either. But it's also recognizing, especially for the actual people that get value out of the product, they're more than happy to pay for it. And it's about finding, kind of the right price point to get a critical mass to establish both a clear trajectory to profitability as well as a product market fit.
Yeah. So if you're just starting out then, right? So how do you, I guess, determine without even just kind of developing the product, if you were to start ZapRide, I guess, clean slate today, would you initially start off charging, kind of go through that route, or would you do it kind of the way you did it, John, where you did a little, I guess, market test where you had it out there for free for a little bit, got some feedback, and then kind of developed it into more of a paid model?
I don't know. That's kind of a hard question to answer because Zaprite is a little bit different as well in that our core focus is on self-custody, and we're not a payment processor. We don't touch money. We don't touch users' funds. We want to encourage self-custody as much as possible, and that they're the payment rails that we optimize for. And so we can't take a percentage cut of the volume that goes through. So that's like an easy solution for a lot of people who are custodians to do. So it was a very different, like we knew we were going to have a different pricing model right from the start. And so it was kind of that question of, okay, well, like how many features do I build to get it to a stage where then I can start to charge? But if you're a custodian, or if your pricing model is to take a percentage, then maybe you can just do that straight from the start, because there's less of a barrier to entry for your users. So yeah, I mean, I hope that answers the question, but like it's a difficult one to answer because of our core focus is on self-custody, and so the pricing model definitely had to be a very different business model for sure.
Yeah, and of course, Zaprite's like a unique business, I guess, in that sense of things. And a lot of Bitcoin businesses definitely are, unique in a sense where, like you said, it's more open source projects. You can, I don't know, do some revenue sharings. There's a lot of unique things and aspects that Bitcoin brings to businesses. But, I kind of want to get back to, I guess, the revenue side of things. So when you're looking at your market and analyzing like, all right, we have this great product, how much do we charge for it? What are some of the steps that you guys took in order to, I guess, figure out the price point onto something like that, right? Because you said, the payment processors take X amount of fees every single time you swipe your card, for example. And yours is obviously very different in a sense, right? Because it's self-custody. So, how did you go about determining that? And for somebody kind of like looking at more of the market fit for their product, like how would you recommend going through and figuring out pricing models in that sense?
I'll just describe what we did in our case, and then that can, I think probably help inform, each business is different and the way that you'll charge is different. But given what John said, that we're not ever touching people's money, it makes it a lot harder just to take a percentage of a transaction, which is more common for any kind of payment gateway, facilitator, or payment processor. We then, so taking a percentage of a transaction just was technically not viable. Second thing we thought about was, do we charge on, like a number of invoices paid or a number of payment links paid? More API pricing based on the transaction count. That then created this variability in billing and would have made it a lot harder to assess what would be a viable model for a large enough audience. And then we started thinking, well, it's really a SaaS service at the end of the day. And then it came down to figuring out what the right price point was. So basically, first we went through the model. Is it like value of a transaction on a percentage basis? Is it value, number of actual transactions times a rate, or is it more of like a subscription service SaaS fee? We ended up on the SaaS fee because one, it mapped to the actual type of product that was, in terms of we're not processing payments. We are helping to facilitate payments. And then in terms of actually setting the price, we looked to comps in terms of, well, we are delivering a similar service to payment facilitators in the fiat world and payment processors, even if we're not processing payments. And that's how we think our customers will think about it. And so we basically backed into, well, what would a minimum number of value that we would need to facilitate, and what is something in a 1% to 2% range of that on a monthly basis based on the volume we expect to enable. And then some of it was we made a simplifying assumption on, we need to establish two things: a pattern of payment for our customers and a demonstration that there's a critical mass of those customers that are willing to pay, because we knew from the start that we would have to build our own billing system. We're a payments company, but if you want to accept Bitcoin as payment, it will always be true because we'll help deliver the services for you. If you're in the fiat world, there's any number of fintech companies you can just plug in, and you don't have to be a billing company in addition to whatever your product is. In our case, that wasn't true. And in most cases, if you're a Bitcoin company, you want to accept Bitcoin as payment, but there aren't billing solutions that fit hand in glove with your company. And so we knew who we were in terms of we are a Bitcoin payments company and a Bitcoin payment gateway. Let's create a very basic, simple to understand. A business can do the math on what amount of business they expect to do and whether or not the $25 a month or discounted 20% a year is worth the value. And we set it at a level that we thought was commensurate with the product that we're at today, though knowing that we're going to get more sophisticated as a billing company over time, and not to overthink it, because if we tried to be a super complicated billing company and a Bitcoin payment gateway at the same time, we have limited resources, we wouldn't be able to do it. So it's kind of a hierarchical decision-making process, but then also one that involves a lot of simplifying assumptions and then putting it out in the market and seeing feedback. And we're happy where we ended up now, but we also know we're going to monetize the relationships that we're adding every day more than we are today. But we're still getting the market feedback that we need and want right now.
Yeah, that's great. So then you guys continue to build, right? So you have the price that you set today, and then obviously you're going to be adding more features, and a lot of things have been coming out, right? I mean, I think even throughout this year, you guys have integrated with Square. You just added the API that you announced today. So there's a lot of great things coming to the pipeline. Like, how do you determine? Okay, we've added X amount of features, like what we've had before is this value. Like, now we're going to increase that because we just keep building and getting better. How do you keep that balance where, you want to keep building a better product for your customers, but, at the end of the day, things are going to cost money, right? You're getting that feedback from the paying customers and adding things. And so, then the price is essentially going to go up. How are you going to, I guess, battle that there in the future?
I mean, it's in our mind, it's fairly simple in terms of the features that we're adding that we actually want to charge incrementally for, or where we feel like we're backfilling a gap that previously existed that improves an experience to then accelerate growth in terms of the user experience and the value. So things like Teams, we're like, okay, there's certain companies that we're working with that really value this, and that's clearly a feature that people are willing to pay for, and we should charge for it. Then there are other things like we just made a feature improvement based on some customer feedback on an invoice. That's not the type of release that makes the core product better for all the users using the invoicing, but let's just take a bet on if we make these improvements, we'll 10x the growth of this line. So it really just comes down to the nature of the investment as well as the nature of the release, and then also anchoring to value delivered, value received, and what the customer's logically going to map to and say, I either need this or not. It's not going to prevent me from using the platform, and it's worth the value.
And yeah, and just to add a little bit to that as well is when we were building this subscription model, we built our own custom subscription model. We didn't use Stripe subscriptions or any third-party subscriptions. We built our own with the intention that this will be a user-facing feature at some point. And so we wanted to start off with, one simple tier, and then we can test that, see how it works for us. And then we can start to open up that subscription feature to other users who are going to want to take monthly subscriptions from their customers and do it through ZapRight. So we didn't want to overly complicate it up front by offering, multiple different a la carte options and all this kind of stuff. So that was a decision that we had to kind of like constantly think of as we were like adding our own subscription model. Was like, okay, how is this going to scale out to all our users as well? Because we know this is a feature that they want. They've been asking for it. So that kind of determined like some of the decisions that we were making as well.
Yeah, that's great. And then, I just before we wrap it up here, I got one more question on, obviously we're going through this Bitcoin bull market, and you guys hold Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and a lot of companies and your customers also do the same. I think last bull market we saw a lot of Bitcoin companies get over leveraged. A lot of them unfortunately went under. So how are you going to, I guess, level, with the FOMO, the excitement, all that kind of things that comes with this next bull market? I know, Parker, you said a little bit earlier, by kind of evaluating when you're in that cycle, I guess, what are the signals that you guys are going to be looking at to see, when it's a good enough time to be like, okay, maybe we go a little bit more cash during this time period, or maybe we're, getting back into that bear market.
I mean, I think every company is different, but in our case, I don't think we're ever going to have to face that problem based on where we're at in the cycle, based on what our burn is, which I view as nominal, and wherever, if we are in the beginning of an adoption wave, but then also knowing that based on the traction that we're seeing in the market, we don't view kind of capital being a risk at the same time, and we also have a plan to fund the business in all scenarios. So I just, like, in our case, expecting what to happen, and it's like we also plan for, hey, what if Bitcoin went to 50K and stayed there? But I don't think it's gonna be something that you evaluate based on the actual underlying costs of your business that you need to fund. Like, as an example, if Bitcoin went up 4 times and then came back down 80% of the time, well, we wouldn't rebalance. Like, we're not trying to time the market, and we're comfortable operating with the amount of dollars in our business today. So that's not going to change in a world where we think we need more dollars just because the price of Bitcoin went up. We'd actually be thinking, well, maybe we can use less dollars.
Gotcha. All right. Well, John and Parker, thanks so much, guys, for coming on up.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.